I'm Andre, I'm a leadership consultant, and today I want to talk about a thing that we all have to deal with, and it's called the conflict between sincerity and politeness. And it's this basic idea that in everything we do, on one hand, we cannot be 100% honest. If we were to say everything that's going through our heads, unfiltered in any way, we wouldn't go through half an hour without getting into a fist fight. On the other hand, if we get to be too polite, if we're all smiles and we try to accommodate everyone and everything all the time, we end up accepting too much shit basically, and that has very negative consequences as well. So either extreme is bad. On one hand, we're too aggressive, too violent, and we can't agree on anything. On the other extreme, we get into toxic positivity, and that has a very negative impact at a personal level and at a team and organization level. So the question is, how can we balance these things to get it right? And I think a key skill that we all need is the ability to contradict someone, to have a different opinion and voice that opinion in a way in which it is clear, easily understood, assertive, but polite and respectful at the same time. And today I want to give you 4 techniques for doing just that. How to contradict people clearly, effectively, but politely. The first technique is to call out and label the disagreement yourself. A mistake a lot of people make is that when they contradict someone, they're trying to sugarcoat it too much. And they sugarcoat it so much that it becomes transparent and actually annoying. And in the end, it makes it even more difficult to reach consensus with the other individual. And it sounds like, hey, I hear what you're saying and you're absolutely right and I totally agree, but, and then everybody knows that nothing before but means anything. And in a way, this is harmful to your desire to find common ground because people understand this, people see this, because they know that whatever you're saying doesn't matter and they're just waiting for you to get to the part where you actually want to contradict them. And because it's so subtle and so polite, it feels political and it feels hidden and it feels manipulative, or it can feel. Rather than doing that, I would be direct, but I will label and call out my own disagreement. So I would say, hey, actually, I totally disagree with that. Actually, I have a very different opinion. Hear me out. And I think this is a better way to approach it because I'm not trying to hide my disagreement. I'm not trying to sugarcoat my disagreement. I'm naming it, I'm labeling it, I'm calling it out, I'm putting it on the table. And that is a gesture of trust because by doing that, I am being very transparent and very honest. And I think in most situations that actually helps establish common ground, increases the possibility of reaching a mutually satisfactory decision. So that is the first technique. The second technique would be what I call, let's take an example. Now, when people have a disagreement about anything, frequently their disagreement goes up into the more conceptual, higher level, more general arguments. Let's take an example. For example, you're discussing at work in your team if you should hire people more based on their specific skills right now or more based on their attitude and possibility for growth in the future. And we're having this debate. And if we generalize this debate and we start to talk in very vague, generic terms about what attitude means and what skills mean, that will become a conversation that leads nowhere. Because if you take it into high-level generic ground, you can have reasonable, smart-sounding arguments for either position and you're just going to spin in circles and get nowhere. What you should do instead is go down into the specific details of your situation. And the best way to do that is by saying, let's take an example. Let's stop discussing in theory and in principle and let's take an example. Let's take a resume, for example, and let's take it line by line and discuss what we think means skills versus attitude on a specific example, on a real example in our situation. Let's take a recent candidate and discuss what we think it means point by point, skills versus attitude. And I guarantee you that after 2 or 3 examples like this, you're going to be way more likely to find common ground and understand each other better and create some kind of trust in that conversation way more than if you discuss in generalities. The third technique is a continuation of the let's take an example technique, and it's how can we test it? Sometimes, no matter how much we talk, examples or not, we cannot reach consensus. We cannot reach an agreement. We cannot be sure which way is the best. And if we reach this point, one of the most useful things we can do is to test it. Like in this example from the TV show Chernobyl, we have the person in charge and we have two groups of scientists disagreeing with each other. They have very different opinions about what's happening. The person in charge may have their intuition, they may suspect one of them is right, but they can't definitively say so. Not least because they're not scientists themselves and they can't directly argue the point. So what do? They simply say, okay, you have different opinions, I understand that. How can we test it?
I understand. You think Legasov is wrong. How shall we prove it?
How can we devise an experiment such that we know for sure who is right? And they quickly find what that experiment can be.
We could cover one of our trucks with lead shielding. Mount the dosimeter on the front.
They can measure it in a certain way using a certain device, whatever, and that will give them definitive, conclusive proof of who is right.
It's not 3 Röntgen. It's 15,000.
So if you find yourself that simply talking about something, including if you share data in studies and whatever, but simply talking about something doesn't get you anywhere, and you tried once and you tried twice, it may be time to try to see how can we test it. And the fourth and final technique to disagree is to avoid the necessity for agreement completely. And I know this seems like a bit of a trick technique, but I see it happening a lot when people seek the agreement of their team, their managers, or whoever, when such agreement is not required. Yes, sometimes to do some things, you should ask for permission, you should try to get feedback from various people, but some other times you don't need to. And people sometimes have this need to go in front of their teams or in front of their colleagues or in front of their managers and say, hey, I want to do this, what do you think? And those people, usually trying to be helpful, are going to say, hey, I like this, I don't like this about what you're trying to do. And then you end up in this kind of debate or necessity to convince them or to provide them with more data or on something that they didn't really need their approval or their help or their cooperation. Some things, smaller scale things, better just do them on your own. Do them on your own or get help from one or two individuals privately. Test them, see what happens, try them out. And then they're either going to work or they're not going to work. In either case, you can go and present the result to your team or your managers and say, hey, I tried this, just so you know, I had this question, I tested in this way, and the result is this, whatever, be it positive or negative, both are valuable. And this is a great way to avoid unnecessary conversation, not bother your colleagues or your managers with sort of sometimes kind of trivial things, and also to show initiative and develop your autonomy skills. So that's it. These are the 4 techniques I have for you today on how to disagree forcefully, clearly, assertively, but respectfully, politely, and in a very professional way. Have a good one.